Hi, my name is Martin Purnell, and welcome to Off-Grid Christianity, a weekly podcast for those who go or don't go to church and where we can meet and hear from those that have made their faith count. This podcast series is to encourage via conversation, and you can contact us as well by email, ogc@accessradio.biz, and biz is spelled B-I-Z. So today's guest, who is he? Well, he is the founder of Malcolm Down Publishing, formed in 2015. Our guest was previously a publishing manager for 15 years, overseeing 400 titles and Bibles. So why did our guest want to start his own independent publishing company in 2015? Why did our guest want to help and provide a home for another publishing company, namely Sarah Grace? Later on in this podcast, I'll be finding out more about the new font for Dyslexics from someone who was involved, namely Sarah Grace. Why does our guest want to help unpublished authors? What has he noticed regarding authors who have a Christian background to those with none? Why did I guest run the London Marathon in 2024? Gives me great pleasure to speak to today's guest, who has the same name as the publishing company, namely Malcolm Down. Malcolm, thank you so much for joining us. What a coincidence, eh? Got the same name as the publishing company. How did that happen?
I really wonder. Thank you, Bart. It's lovely to be here.
For those that know nothing about Malcolm Down, where are you living currently, good sir?
I'm in the county town of Staffordshire, Stafford itself, up in the West Midlands, halfway between Birmingham and Stoke-on-Trent.
No, very well indeed. Well, you haven't got a Staffordshire accent. We'll find out if you've got an accent at all from a particular place. We'll find out later on. But in the meantime, let's go for it, good sir. 5 important or maybe not so important questions. Let's see how you get on, please. Question number 1. If you could invite anybody from history for an evening meal, alive or dead, so that you could ask them questions, Malcolm, who would it be?
Eric Liddell.
Why do you want to have Eric Liddell over for a meal?
Yeah, well, I am a runner. And when I first saw the film Chariots of Fire, it instantly became my favourite film of all time because it combines my passion for running the Olympic Games with my passion for Jesus. And so it just had all the elements in a film that I could ever wish for. And so, Eric Liddell became a hero of mine straight away. And I delved into his life story, just absolutely fascinated by his whole approach to life and missionary exploits and his ability, not just as a runner, but also as a rugby player as well. So,
yeah, we forget about that.
Yeah, he's played for Scotland.
He did. You can always see just how important somebody is in sort of looking back in the Christian times by how many books have been written about him. And even now, there's a book that's just come out, another biography about Eric Liddell.
Yes.
It's obviously some story in there that if people don't know about, need to read up about Eric Liddell. So, okay, I go in my time machine. I bring him back fresh from winning his Olympic medal. You've got to cook him a meal, though. What are you going to cook him?
I'm not a brilliant cook. I have a few staples that I cook, and one of them is chicken and mushroom in the slow cooker, with double cream. So it's got a bit of everything in there for him,
Yeah.
Every good sprinter needs is a good dose of protein and a few carbs as well, So I thought that would be the most appropriate meal.
The carbs being oven-ready chips to go with it, I would have thought.
Well, probably rice, probably jacket potato, to be honest. Yeah, jacket potato. Nice and healthy.
Yeah, because it can soak up all that fantastic sauce. And of course, as I bring back my time machine, I have to eat with you as well, so I'll enjoy that meal. Thank you. Question 2. Who is your favourite biblical character or favourite biblical story or favourite parable, please, sir?
I love the writings of John, because not only do we have the gospel, we have John as the character. As I said, being a runner, I'm always fascinated by the race between him and Peter on Resurrection Day.
Yeah.
Who got to the tomb first? John was the quicker runner, because it said he got there first, even though Peter was the one who went inside first. John arrived first, So I share that affinity with John as a fellow runner. He wrote Revelation, he wrote the letters. And so there's so much material to draw upon from him. And of course, he was, he lived to an old age as well, the only disciple to live to an old age. And so, I just find him a fascinating character because you get his whole life story within the New Testament.
You can just see it, can't you? Years later. And don't forget, Peter, I beat you in a race to the grave. And Peter go, oh, here we go again. It's only because you had better running shoes than me. I had the old-fashioned running shoes. You had the modern-day ones.
The carbon-plated ones. Yeah.
Exactly. Question 3. If you were Prime Minister for the day and could change any law or impose a new law, Malcolm, what would it be, please?
I would change the abortion law overnight. That's the one law which just makes me sad every time I read about it. something's got to be done. You know, the number of babies that we've lost in the 50 odd years since that 67 law was introduced, it's just heartbreaking. So I would definitely change that.
If I can give a plug here for a future podcast, we're going to be doing a special on abortion, mainly because a previous guest, his name is Dr. Mark Houghton, and he wrote a very, very good book with two other people explaining, right, these are the questions you need to ask if you're seriously thinking about going for abortion. So that is a podcast that we're going to be recording soon.
Which we published, of course.
Funny that. Yes, I thoroughly enjoyed reading his book as well about his dad in the Second World War.
Yes, yeah. Through Fire and Water. Very good read for all, military enthusiasts out there, and World War II enthusiasts particularly.
Well, that's why I had to read it. Well, let's hope people enjoy the podcasts as well. Now we're giving it a big plug.
Yeah.
Question 4. Outside of family events, what has been your most enjoyable day out, please, Malcolm?
Cast your mind back to the Paris Olympics last year, 2024. I went with my youngest daughter, Sarah, to the stadium, the Olympic Stadium in Paris, to watch the evening, which featured, amongst other things, the women's pole vault, the men's 400 metres, the heptathlon, and the men's steeplechase, and 80,000 people in an athletic stadium for the Olympics. Just spine-tingling and just the most amazing evening.
How easy was it to get tickets?
Not as difficult as for London 2012, which I also attended. We managed to get them fairly easily on the first go. So, yeah.
Question 5. What has been your most embarrassing moment to date, please, Malcolm?
Probably the one that's just happened. I was running in a relay race for my club about 7 weeks ago. And it was the 4 by 100 metre relay for what's known as the vets team. The way it works is you've got to have one runner over the age of 50 and 3 runners over the age of 40. So I'm the only one in our club who is eligible for the over 50 spot on the team. So they said, "Oh, what leg do you want to run?" And I said, "Oh, I'll run the first leg because I've only got to hand the baton over. I don't have to receive it. So there's less risk of anything going wrong."
Good point.
Yeah. And so without any practice or rehearsing beforehand, I start off baton in hand, and I'm running round the bend, stretching out my arm to give the baton to the second leg runner. And as I stretch my arm out, I basically over-rotate, come crashing to the floor, broke my collarbone, grazed my shoulder, grazed my knee, sprained my wrist in front of about 250 spectators. And my daughter was there watching, videoing it. And all you can hear on the video is the gasps of the audience as I go down onto the floor, where I remained for about the next 10 minutes, not able to move. So very painful and very embarrassing.
But you managed to hand over the baton before falling and they went on to win the race.
No, unfortunately, the baton was dropped. All I could hear while I was on the floor was one of the marshals saying, "Well, if he'd stood up and handed the baton over, they could have still finished." I think it was me with a broken collarbone and all my other injuries, and all he can think about was us not finishing the race. But I was down to do the 400 and the 200 as well, so collectively lost for the team, potential 24 points for the team. So it was not a great day for us as a team. But hey ho.
Are they talking to you yet?
That was the end of the track season for me. So I've not seen them since then.
Well, we have to ask, how is the shoulder?
Fortunately, it's much improved. I'm running again. I did my first park run last week. Last night, I was back on the track doing my first speed session again.
Oh, good.
I've made a good recovery and, things are going well again.
Good. I did see a picture of you somewhere and you were wearing the full GB running strip.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, either you did run for the GB or you'd be like most of us, you just buy the kit because you like it.
I've represented Great Britain at World and European Masters event.
Oh, wow.
I think it's actually, they've lowered the age now. It used to be 40, but it's 35 now. So I competed in Sacramento at the World Masters Games at the age of 50. And then 55, I went to Aarhus in Denmark in the European Champs. And then I went to Italy and competed in the over 60 age group. That was in 2023 and came back with 2 medals. Silver in the team 10K event, and I got a gold in the 4 by 400 metre relay.
Oh, superb. And without falling over either.
Without falling over. Although the Polish guy fell over in front of me. I was running leg 2, and the Polish guy fell over just in front of me on leg one, and I had to jump over him as I was starting my leg. So yeah, it's a common occurrence. We all seem to fall over.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that so far. Let's go for it in more detail then, Malcolm. Tell us a bit more about yourself, your life, and when you became a Christian.
Yeah, okay. As I said to you earlier, I moved to Stafford with my parents when I was about 6 years old, having been born in Croydon and then spent a few years in a place called Henfield in Sussex. We moved to Stafford because my dad had a job at a Christian youth centre. He was a youth worker for many years, and he came up to Stafford to manage the Homecroft Youth Centre, which was basically started by a group of Christians from the local Brethren Church. At the time, early 60s, it was when the youth club movement was kind of getting going, and churches were involved in youth ministry, and they really wanted to help kids that hadn't had any exposure to church or Christian families. They wanted to provide a place for them where they could come and where the leaders could share the gospel with them, whilst at the same time befriending them and getting to know them. And so that's really why we moved to Stafford. My dad was involved in youth work for much of his life and was involved in a lot of Christian youth work, particularly. We went to church as kids. We went to a local Methodist church, and then about the age of 15, my mum and dad decided that the Methodist church wasn't really doing it for them, because they'd been brought up in the Methodist church, but they got filled with the Holy Spirit later in life, in their 40s, and then they decided that they should get baptized in water rather than just have the sprinkling as children, which they'd had. They felt they needed to have the total immersion experience. And I remember as a teenager attending their baptism, and it kind of set me thinking, what is this really all about? Because up till then, I had a very sort of childlike shared faith. I believed in God, but I didn't really know what salvation meant. And I remember it very clearly. It was an Easter Sunday morning at the church, which was an Elim Pentecostal church that they started attending at the time. And I was 15 years old. And I remember hearing the gospel for the first time, because we didn't really hear the gospel in the Methodist church. There was an appeal went out after the gospel message, and very gingerly put my hand up to acknowledge Jesus as Lord and Saviour. I think I was one of the most reluctant converts. It was more a case of, this is something I ought to do, rather than kind of feeling passionate about it. And it wasn't till 3 years later, when I got to university, I went to Loughborough University, and I met what I would consider like real Christian students who taught me about baptism and baptism in the Spirit and speaking in tongues. And so I had a whole new experience of Christianity at Loughborough, and I think that's kind of when my faith became very real to me during those days.
And of course, Loughborough's famous in the UK for being sports orientated.
Yes, it is.
What did you go and study at Loughborough?
Surprisingly, sports studies.
Well, there you go.
Yes, I was very well into my interest in all things sporting, and particularly athletics. And of course, my big hero at the time was Sebastian Coe, because back in those days, you were either a Coe fan or you were
Steve Ovett.
In fact, I liked them both. Coe was at Loughborough, and I thought, that's where I want to go, because I might meet him, And sure enough, he was still there when I went, and I did meet him in the weights training room, and nearly actually ended his career in the weights training room by dropping a weight about 6 inches away from his foot. This was in the autumn of 79, bearing in mind he went on to win the Olympic 1500 meters in 1980.
In Moscow. I
could have ruined his whole career if that weight had dropped on his foot.
Yeah.
That's my claim to fame. He didn't really speak to me after that. So.
And this is where we find out that Polish guy who fell in front of you was in fact closely related to Seb Coe, and he was under orders to do it. Seb Coe hadn't forgotten. For those that are listening at the moment, that is not your collarbone creaking, it's your chair.
Yes, I need to remain still. I have a habit of moving up and down on my chairs.
We all do that. How come then, if you were studying sports, science, whatever you want to call it these days, how come you then ended up working in the publishing sector?
That's a good question. God is amazing, isn't he? How he has a plan for our lives, but we don't really know what it is. I didn't really know. When I went to university, I had no idea what I wanted to do. All I knew was that I enjoyed sport. And the careers advice from my sixth form careers advisor at the time was, well, what do you enjoy doing? I enjoy sport. well, go and study sport at uni then. And that was the sum total of my careers advice. And at the time, the only really career options for people studying PE and sport was to become a PE teacher or to go into the leisure industry, the health club. I didn't want to become a PE teacher because I knew a lot of teachers at Loughborough and they all hated the job. So I thought, no, I'll go into the leisure industry. So I moved to London. Well, I did a year out after uni and then I got a job as a gym instructor for a company in London. And I ended up managing the health and fitness club at the Institute of Directors on Pall Mall. And it was a great job, met all sorts of really interesting people. But I'd met a young lady at the time and we wanted to get married. House prices in London in mid-1980s were horrendous. And so we had a friend who had recently moved to Milton Keynes and he said to us, oh, you want to move to Milton Keynes? Great church up here. You can buy houses really cheap on the shared ownership scheme. So we thought, oh, well, if God's in this, then it'll happen. And of course, it did happen very quickly. We managed to get a house. We got married, got a house, and then I ended up living there for 30 odd years. So married Dawn, we had 3 wonderful children. But sadly, in 2001, she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And 2010, she finally succumbed to the illness. So my life took a different turn from then. That's not the question you asked. I've got sidetracked.
No, but it's an important question because this can lead on, if that's all right. How did you cope at the time and where was your faith?
When Dawn was diagnosed with cancer back in 2001, I felt the Lord say, just trust me. I know what I'm doing, just trust me, And that was a real lesson for me because, up until then, life has been pretty good. We'd raised 3 kids. I mean, they were young at the time. My youngest was only 7 years old. My son was 9 and my eldest was 11. So they were kids. We didn't know what life was going to look like. The prognosis wasn't great because it was already stage 3 when she was diagnosed and it quickly turned to stage 4, which is terminal. And so normal life expectancy for stage 4 ovarian cancer is 2 years. We thought, we got 2 or 3 years at the most, But Dawn was the most amazing. She was a piano teacher, wonderfully gifted, lovely vocalist. She led worship at church. And she was one of these people that's very tenacious. If someone tells her she can't do something, that's like license for her to do it anyway, She went through the NHS protocol, which was full hysterectomy, followed by 6 lots of chemotherapy. And everything seemed to be okay for a while. But on her 6 months check, they said to her, it's come back. Dawn, being the logical person that she was, she decided that if the chemotherapy and the treatment that the NHS had given to her was the best that was available at the time, but it didn't work, then there was no point in doing it again. There must be an alternative. That then sent her looking at alternative cancer treatments. Just so happened that at that time I was already publishing manager at Authentic, and a book had come across my desk called The Coming Cancer Cure by an amazing Christian consultant called Dr. Francisco Contreras. He ran the Oasis of Hope Hospital in Tijuana in Mexico, and he was coming to the UK, and I said, look, Dawn, let's get a meeting with this guy. He's written this book, which we're going to publish. I think he could have something that you might find interesting. So, cut a long story short, he came over. We met with him. He said, look, you've got to come out to the hospital in Mexico. So immediately I think, well, how much is that going to cost? And I think it was about $10,000 or something at the time. I said, no problem. I'd got an entry for the London Marathon that year. And I said, we'll just use that entry. We'll raise the money and you can go. So that's what I did. In fact, I think we raised about $20,000 in the end, which was very fortuitous because it actually paid for 2 trips out there. And she had the most amazing time in Mexico. But for listeners who don't know, the Oasis of Hope Hospital is a Christian-run hospital. The Christian ethos runs all the way through the hospital. So before every blood test, the nurses will pray for the patients, for them to be able to produce the right amount of blood. And there's pastoral team who come round every day and pray for the patients. I mean, the whole thing is just birthed in prayer. They have a chapel, they have Sunday morning services. Dawn got involved in those. She led worship at those. They have a unique care plan. So they do things like chemotherapy, but they also do lots of alternative therapies as well. Oxygen, ozone therapy. They do vitamin-based therapy. The whole diet is geared towards helping patients recover. So I don't know how much you know about cancer, but cancer cells thrive off sugar. One of the worst things you can do as a cancer patient is eat sugary foods and drinks. They don't have any of that. They cut sugar out completely, and they only give patients food which is nutritionally rich, designed to help kill cancer cells. So the whole approach is very wholesome, very holistic. And as soon as Dawn came back, she had tests on the NHS, and her cancer levels basically had plummeted. So that was year 2. So for the next 5 years, so we're now 7 years in, all her levels remained very low. And she was controlling the cancer through the diet that she was on, which was essentially a Mediterranean diet. Mm-hmm. And through juicing, she drank copious amounts of carrot juice. She was on a really healthy living regime. And yeah, that was enough to keep the cancer at bay for a good 5 years. In fact, she was declared, because if you're cancer-free for 5 years, you are, according to the NHS, described as a cancer survivor.
Yes.
Doesn't matter whether you die on 5 years and 1 day. If you make 5 years, you're classified as a survivor. Sadly, a couple of years later, the cancer came back. And even though she went out to Mexico again, she also had more chemotherapy. And I think that it was the chemotherapy in the end that had an adverse reaction. Sadly, she did deteriorate 6 months after that last bout of chemo. She passed away in 2010. Yeah, and the kids were older at the time, which was a blessing because, as I said, they were 7, 9 and 11 when she was diagnosed. But when she passed away 9 years later, they were obviously 16, 18 and 20. So they were in a much better place to be able to handle it. I was left with essentially 3 adults rather than 3 kids, which we give thanks to God for, because, it would have been much, much harder for me to bring up 3 children rather than work with 3 essentially adults.
Well, you don't know about me, apart from the fact that I was born the same year as you. My wife also in 2001 had cancer, but she's still a cancer survivor.
Right.
So I'm from the other side of the coin, and admittedly I had an 18-month-old baby boy to look after, as well as a very ill wife. For those listening today, we don't often hear what it's like as the husband and the pressures that he feels and faces to look after a sick wife going through the chemo process.
Yeah.
What do you remember of that time, and where was your faith in all this?
Yeah, I mean, it was a long time ago now, because it's been 15 years since Dawn passed away. All I remember is that life for us as a couple was pretty much on hold, in the sense that, as you will appreciate, the cancer journey is very up and down. 1 minute there's an all clear, the next minute there's an elevated cancer marker. So you can't really plan anything long term.
Yes.
But because we were both Christians and we were committed to our faith, we just trusted God throughout the whole process. And the other thing that we felt was really important was to keep life for our children as normal as possible. You've got to remember that a lot of the time, Dawn was actually quite well. She's a big roller coaster fan. She had a bucket list that she wanted to visit every major theme park, certainly all the big ones, Universal Studios, Disney in Florida, California. And over the years, we were blessed in the sense that we were able to tick most of those off the list. We had a lot of fun during those years. They weren't just all dark and gloomy. When she was having chemo, it was tough because, as you probably know, there's all the side effects of the chemo. But we knew that they were only temporary, and that once she got through those, that she would get back to a normal semblance life. She worked as a piano teacher pretty much through the whole process until the last 2 months, I suppose. They were tough times. I think the last 6 months in particular, when we knew things were deteriorating, were probably the hardest, because they were the ones where she needed the most intensive nursing. But, I had a lot of help. Her mum came down from the northeast. We had, nurses coming in, 4 times a day. She had a great network of friends and people from the church, that would come around as well. So thankfully, we were very well supported. And I was working for Authentic Media at the time, and they were very generous in giving me time off for hospital appointments. I think that was the key thing. We did feel very well supported, both in prayer and in practical support. And where my faith was, yeah, I mean, to be honest, it was up and down. You go through all the normal why us type questions, but I think I developed a resilience in those years that stood me through the years since. That no matter what happens in life, God is still God, and he still reigns and he still rules. If you slightly rephrase the question, why not us? Because if you think about the disciples, as I said earlier, John was the only one of the 12 who didn't die an early death. The other 11 the other 10 were all martyred for their faith, and suffering for Jesus is kind of, it goes with the territory, really. We've got no guarantee to avoid suffering when we become Christians. In some ways, the suffering that we go through in life helps us identify more with Jesus and more with his sufferings. It's really how we deal with the suffering that's more of an important question that I've come to learn over the years. And life's been very up and down since Dawn passed away. It's not been easy running a business, for one thing or another. In the current climate, it has its own challenges. I've had a few ups and downs with relationships in that time as well. Tried to get things going in that department, and nothing's really succeeded. Although I am with somebody now, which is 5 months in and going really well.
Oh, that's good.
I'm hopeful.
I know you hear it on programs, obviously aren't Christian based, and it'd be like, well, she's obviously looking down on you and thinking, well, we'll leave the theology behind there. But what do you think Dawn would think about you now having a serious relationship with somebody else, even though there's been an intervening period of quite a few years?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously that verse about there being no marriage in heaven.
Yeah.
About 3 days before she died, she said to me, I give you full permission to marry whoever you want after I've gone. So I felt like with her permission, it was okay for me to marry again.
Yeah.
I didn't realise it was going to take 15 years since then.
Yeah.
I have this sort of sense of her up there. Not that one.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I wonder what Dawn would have thought about you sort of chucking it all in and going on your own, forming Malcolm Down Publishing.
That was another reason for doing it, to be honest, because another thing she constantly told me throughout our married life was that she said I was more than capable of running my own business. She ran her own business. She had her own piano teaching business, which was very successful. She had, over the years, hundreds of piano pupils. And she always encouraged me. I always used to quip with her because I was quite fearful. I'm very risk averse by character. I was always the person who would settle for the regular paycheck rather than risking setting something up for myself. And so I said to her once, oh, well, if ever I'm made redundant, then maybe I'll do it then, And because that's what happened 4 years after she died, 2014, I was made redundant from Authentic. And her words came back to me. I could hear her saying it, right, this is the time, you got to do it. So that's what I did, took the plunge. I did have some very clear prophetic words at the time as well, which were confirmation that what she was saying would come to pass.
It's interesting, isn't it? You never think about Christian organisations, if they're set up correctly, that they would ever make redundancies. How did you cope with that?
Well, I'd been in the industry by that time for almost 20 years, and I'd seen redundancies in every company I'd worked for. Christian companies are no different to any other company. If there's an economic downturn, Christian businesses suffer like everybody else. It's how you manage it, and hopefully Christian businesses manage that process with maybe more compassion.
Yeah, but it's what happens as a result of it, isn't it? And where you put your faith and your trust in.
Yeah, and who knows, I believe God was in that redundancy, because I would never have started Malcolm Down Publishing if I hadn't been made redundant. And I think the timing was important because when was I made redundant? 2014. So I had some money from the redundancy, which I put in to get the company off the ground. And then a couple of years later, I needed some more money to put in. And I got to the age of 55. So I was able to take out some of my pension, which I was able to inject into the company as well. So the timing was right.
Well, in fact, you've got quite a few titles as well. It's not just a one-off event with Malcolm Down Publishing. I'm just interested because quite often you find Christian companies that will use a vague reference in the Bible so you know that it was a Christian behind it, maybe. Malcolm Down Publishing, I think you're going to struggle to find the word Malcolm in the Bible. Maybe Down, you might find the word Down. Why did you go for your name as the title of the company?
That's a really good question. It was one that I thought through a lot at the time, because I'd worked for publishers that were named after people who started. So like Thomas Nelson, I worked for Thomas Nelson. And other publishers, Hodder and Stoughton.
Is that how you pronounce it? I've always said Hodder and Stoughton. It's Stoughton, is it?
Don't quote me on that. Collins.
Yeah.
They were all named after the people.
Penguin.
Who started them.
Mr. Penguin.
All right. And so I couldn't think of a name. There was nothing that God was giving me as a name. And I just felt this nudge. If you call it after yourself, then it's your responsibility then, isn't it? People know you. It's your name and your reputation. It's like there's no escaping from it.
Yeah.
You're completely responsible for it. And so it just seemed to be the right thing to do at the time. That's what I did. And also I'd had 14 years as a publishing manager at Authentic, and 6 years before then as a sales representative. So, my name was known in the trade. So it was probably more advantageous for me to use my name than call it something different.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Let's go further into it then, if that's okay, regarding the publishing. How difficult is it these days to run a publishing company?
It's very hard. It's a very low margin business. If I was to tell you how much we receive from the sale of a book, you'd probably be shocked.
Yeah.
And I use this as an example because if a book is £10 retail, then the first thing that gets sliced off is the wholesale discount. And that can be anything between 40 and 68%. So if you can imagine, say it's an average of 50%. So we get £5 back from every book that's sold for £10 to the customer. So out of that £5, we have to pay the print cost of the book. We have to pay the author royalty. We have to pay for all the marketing, and we have to pay for all our fixed costs. You can understand that there's not much left as a profit. And the reality of it is that I probably live off less than the minimum wage because I have to pay my staff first.
Yes.
And if you're the owner of a company, your priority is paying your staff. So they get paid first. And if there's anything left, then I get paid. But you know what? God is so faithful. I live with my brother and sister-in-law. We share the expenses on the house. We don't have a mortgage. I don't have huge running costs. I don't have any expensive hobbies. Whenever I've needed money for things like my daughter got married in Florida last year, miraculously the money came in to pay for the trip. I'm going to New Zealand in February for a wedding. Again, my airfare was provided for me, miraculously. So it's just when God's in it, you learn to live by faith. And I think that's what running a business is like, because you never know from one month to the next how much money's coming in.
Yeah.
And you just have to trust God each month, that there'll be enough money to pay the bills and maybe some left over. I started the company in 2014/2015 was when the first book came out. And of course, 5 years later, we have COVID. All the Christian bookshops closed down for a year. Our income, was cut by half from the shops. And, it was a really tough time, but somehow we got through it.
And there seems to be less and less Christian bookshops these days as well. So.
When I was a sales rep, there were over 500 Christian bookshops in the country. They're probably less than 150 now, I would imagine.
I could just see when your daughter came to you and said, we're going to get married, Dad, and we're going to get married in Florida. And you could say, what's wrong with Stafford? What's wrong with Milton Keynes?
Yeah, well, she was already in her 30s by the time she got married. So she was of, shall I say, independent means. Daddy didn't have to fork out too much.
That is good, but I'm sure Stafford and Milton Keynes would have had far better weather than Florida.
Yeah, but didn't have the theme parks though, did it?
That's what did it.
You know what I said about theme parks?
Yeah, absolutely.
That gene got passed down to the kids.
Oh, that's a great answer. Well, thank you for being so honest on this. Now that we understand a bit more about the publishing industry, and you're not exactly rolling in it like they would have done maybe 50, 60, 70 years ago, all of a sudden Sarah Gray's publishing comes along and you want to lend a hand. Tell me more about that, please.
It didn't actually happen like that. When I worked at Authentic, There was an author that I published that became a best-selling author. Sarah was his PA. And so Sarah was the one who used to order his books from me at Authentic. And then when I started Malcolm Down Publishing, she got in touch, and because she's dyslexic, I had an author who, I've got to get this right, I had an author who he'd had a stroke and he was in a wheelchair and he couldn't communicate very well. And I knew Sarah was a counsellor, psychotherapist, and I thought it'd be good if she came with me on the visit, because I felt a little bit uneasy about meeting him. As we were going up in the car, she read the notes that he provided about his book, which is basically his story of how he was a top dentist and how he'd had this stroke and it had left him in a wheelchair and he couldn't speak except the odd word, and he communicated using one of these sort of Stephen Hawking program type thing. Anyway, as she was reading the notes, she said, "This guy is dyslexic." I said, "How do you know?" She said, "Well, I'm dyslexic." And I recognise the repetition and everything else. So she knew immediately. And I said, "Well, that's great that you're with me, because if he is dyslexic, you'll be able to talk the same language." We went up, we saw him, we ended up publishing the book. I said, "Would you want to work for me then?" And so she came on board to help me with the cover designs. She's a real creative eye for cover designs. And then we were offered a children's book. And I said, "Well, why don't we set up an imprint for our children's books and call it Sarah Grace, because that's your name. And it's probably better that if we have a children's imprint, it has a different name to Malcolm Down." And so that's what happened. We set up Sarah Grace Publishing as an imprint of Malcolm Down Publishing, and we worked together to develop the children's list initially. I sent it to a publishing conference in Nashville I think it was about 2017.
That's a great link in, because, as you know, I was able to speak to Sarah earlier on today about her dyslexia and about this incredible new font that she has developed over the past 7 years called the Grace font. It's so good. What I'm going to do is, at the end of this podcast, I'll put the section that we've got with Sarah, because for those people that know people that have got dyslexia, or maybe they don't really know what dyslexia is all about, like I knew a little bit about it, it is mind-blowing what she's going through, what she has gone through, how she developed this font that is going to make so many people around the world be able to maybe properly read for the first time. And so at the very end of this podcast, Sarah will share more, especially about Nashville.
I'll leave her to tell the story.
Thank you.
So we developed the children's imprint, and then it kind of grew from there, really.
Malcolm, where do you see your publishing going? And I did mention earlier on that you do also print for non-Christians as well as Christians. What do you see in that? And
our primary ministry is to Christian authors. I think we've only ever published one or printed one or two books for non-Christians, and they've just been based on relationships that we've had in the past. But primarily we just publish for Christian authors, because we feel our mission is to help Christian authors on their journey as writers. We primarily help those who feel a calling from God to write and to get the content of their books exposed to a wider audience. That's what our primary calling is.
If I thought I could write a book, because they often say, don't they, everyone's got a book in them.
Yes.
You'd be pleased to know I haven't. I have no intention of sitting down on a keyboard and typing one out. But just suppose I did, what would be the process for me to contact you and say, "Oi, got to read this. I am the new J.K. Rowling"?
It's all on our website, malcolmdown.co.uk. Just click on the tab that says "Getting Your Book Published." It's a very simple procedure. The first thing is you get an evaluation report from one of our editors. The report will detail the strengths and weaknesses of the book in terms of its content, its structure, suitability for publication, what recommendations for bringing it up to sort of a publishable state. You go away, you work on the manuscript, you resubmit it, and then we tell you whether we want to publish it or not. And if we do agree to publish it, you can buy into one of our 3 publishing packages, because we're a hybrid publisher. So we offer publishing packages, and they're really dependent on the number of books that you want to purchase from the print run. But a hybrid publisher, for those of you who don't know, is a combination of a traditional publisher who does everything that a traditional publisher would do, but at the same time we ask for buy-in from the author. So typically we would request that the author buys in to the print run and maybe purchases 300 to 400 copies of the book from the first print run. And it just means that we can cover our costs, and it just makes the risk less for us, and it's been the very successful way that we've operated for the last 10 years.
We're recording this during Halloween week, and of course, if I did write a book, it'd have to be done by a ghostwriter.
Oh, we have a few books that have been written by ghostwriters.
Do you think that's a good idea, ghostwriting?
Well, it depends, because obviously, if you're not a writer, and not everybody is a writer by any means, if you know someone who can write, but you've got a good story, then a ghostwriter is a good option. One of the most successful books that I published at Authentic was written by a ghostwriter.
Where do we see Malcolm Down Publishing going over the next few years then, do you think?
Well, it's an interesting time, because I'm approaching, as you are, 65, which traditionally, was retirement age.
Yes, let's not go down there, please.
No. And so retirement has been on my mind, because nothing lasts forever. And, I'm in that period of time now where I'm thinking a lot about legacy and how can I secure the legacy of Malcolm Down Publishing long term. I've begun to have a few chats with a few people about what that might look like, and I've begun to seek God on it. My concern is the publishing world is changing rapidly, especially with AI. And the whole publishing landscape has changed a lot in the last 5 years. And I think that process is going to accelerate over the next 5 years. And it probably needs a younger mind than mine to sort of navigate those choppy waters. I'll always be around for consultation. But, I think there will be a time, probably in the next 12 months, when I hand the day-to-day running of the business over to somebody else. And then, we'll see what God has for me. I don't intend to stop working. I think 65 is far too young to retire from work and go and play golf, even though I do play golf and I'd love to play more golf. I think there's other things that God has got for me in store. But what I'd love to be able to do, however long the period is until then, is to be able to hand it over to the right people and in a good, healthy state as well, so that whoever takes it on, will be able to do things with it that I could never do.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Malcolm. That's 3 things we have in common. So I have to talk to you about golf off air, if that's all right.
Of course, I can't play at the moment with my shoulder. So
that's a feeble excuse, young sir. There's a chap who's called Martin Fair, who lives on the east coast of Scotland, and he fell over. It's all on the podcast that we did with him. When he got up, he found that he was paralysed, and he was a single handicap player prior to that accident.
Oh, gosh.
And he's now back to single figures again.
Is he really?
Playing with one arm, yeah.
Wow.
I have trouble playing with 2 arms.
I think I'm going to get some lessons when I start again, because I've never had a golf lesson.
Oh, really?
Since I was a student at Loughborough. And I think the time is overdue to sort of correct my swing. And what better time to do it than when I can't actually swing?
Exactly. If all else fails, take a lesson. You see the golf pro going, if only come sooner. You could have been a pro by now.
My new partner very lovingly said, would you like some golf lessons as your Christmas present? I said, would I? Of course I would. By the time this broadcast is aired, maybe I would have had some golf lessons.
Before we get to the special 15-minute podcast we're going to attach to this from Sarah, which explains all about dyslexia and what this new font will achieve and what it actually does, please have a listen to that, and then you can pass it on to other people, because it is that good. We've got our last question, Malcolm, and I thank you so much for your time and your honesty as well. I did not know we were going to go down that particular running track regarding Dawn, so thank you for your honesty. So, Malcolm Down of Malcolm Down Publishing, who is your Christian hero, please?
Yes, Smith Wigglesworth. When I was at Authentic, I published a biography of his life, and I could not believe what I was reading. And he died not that long ago. I think it was in the 40s he passed away. But I thought, gosh, this guy was ahead of his time. He had the most unorthodox style of evangelism. And I thought, I wonder what today's society would make of him, in this day of sort of social media and everything. I often think, I wonder how he would go down now. His missions are on the front page of national newspapers at the time, And I just thought, we need a Smith Wigglesworth.
Isn't there a story about Smith Wigglesworth raising people from the dead?
Yeah, there is, yeah. And I don't think just once, I think several times. But he used to speak to huge crowds, and he was very much the sort of Christian celebrity of the day.
Malcolm, thank you so much for joining us today. Please have a listen to the following podcast. It's from Sarah Grace. I'll tell you what, perhaps you'd like to introduce it, Malcolm.
Sarah is a dyslexic psychotherapist, which is very difficult to say, as Sarah will probably tell you. She and I have worked together for over 10 years in the business. Sarah has overseen the design of most of the covers that we've published, and she has a real eye for covers, but also a compassion for those who struggle with reading. And that I'm sure she will tell you more about in the following podcast.
Sarah, thank you for joining us today. Tell me, why did you want to get involved with Dyslexia Publishing and this font in particular, Grace Font?
Well, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk about this because it was a kind of a bit of a light bulb moment for me to be diagnosed with dyslexia, because it was pretty much later in life, having struggled a long way through. And I was in the last semester of my psychotherapy training when I literally almost like I couldn't read. So I went to my optician and she said, this time I don't think it's your eyes, because I'd always had a problem with my eyes. She said, I think it's dyslexia, so you need to get a test. So as soon as I got this test, what showed is to get over dyslexia, I'd learned to speed read. And then I got to the big words like psychotherapy, and obviously could say that one. It was just really hard then to read. So I'd just stopped in my tracks.
Yeah.
And it really did take me back to being a child and learning to read and just the hard work of it all and self-esteem, confidence, everything. I was sort of being knocked a lot. Then literally I qualified by the skin of my teeth, came out, and I just went full belt passion to help people with dyslexia in my psychotherapy practice, and then with Malcolm into publishing, going, oh, can I help here? Can I do this? And in the end, he was like, I think we really should start your own imprint, because I was helping with Malcolm Down Publishing at that time.
Obviously, we've all heard, I think, by now of the word dyslexia, but if you haven't got it, maybe we don't fully understand what actually dyslexia really is. Please tell us more about exactly what dyslexia is.
Well, obviously, we kind of know more about the fact that it's about reading and writing, and there's less known about the fact of what it can be like I was saying, self-esteem, confidence. It's part of the processing. So where we would be processing something, it'd be slightly different. And actually, I call it a dyslexic spin. I can have like 3 thoughts at once and they collide. And then I'm sort of going, oh, hang on, where was I going with that? There's always this fear when I'm talking to somebody like you going, oh, I might suddenly go draw a blank screen. But the more we know about dyslexia, how it operates for us personally, the more we can start to figure it out, make sense of it, and then make sense of it for the people around us. So my passion is for young children, partly why I've written a book called Bella Finds Grace, to describe very simply in there that it can be reading, writing, processing, concentration, directions. Like, if you give me 3 directions, I've lost the first one because you gave me 3 or more. I can kind of look back going, oh, it makes sense now why my mum would get frustrated with me, that I didn't pick up 5 items before I left the shop. So it's just things like that. And so memory, and it's the processing. It doesn't mean we haven't got a good memory. Actually, it takes us time to process. So then we might forget something and then remember it again. So there's a number of things that happen with dyslexia. And obviously then that has an impact on how we view ourselves. Children can be told they're not clever. I can remember being told I wasn't academic, which I think is why I was trying to prove a point doing my psychotherapy training at university, like the hardest possible level. I think I was trying to prove that I could do so. I was clever, I could do this, but it makes you feel like you're daft and you're not clever because you could do something one day and then not the next. I have also dyscalculia as well, so it'll be with numbers too. And that can come with or without the reading and the writing. But I think, catching it early at school, understanding for children. And then, in my psychotherapy practice, I'm meeting 50, 60, 70-year-olds going, oh my gosh, this makes sense now. Once they start, because, quite often people have not been diagnosed. And I said recently to somebody, how would we know if dyslexia is like some of these things can seem like dementia? The processing, the memory.
Yeah.
And there's much more talked about dementia now, and not enough I feel about dyslexia. And I jokingly said, how would I know if I'm going one to the other? And someone said, you'd know. And I think, well, actually I would, because actually if we know how dyslexia is for us, we know ourselves, and then it becomes almost, I have a bit of a laugh with it. I can actually quite enjoy it now. And obviously I've made it a big thing through, my work, that to me, it's a strength. I'm turning the corner the other way of, there's a business called Made by Dyslexia, trying to get a dyslexic into every business, because we are so creative. We think out of the box, and we're actually quite empathic people. Obviously that's a generalization, but I see that more and more. If I meet an absolute brilliant creative, I'm like, oh, I wonder if they've got, even if it's dyslexic traits, because actually we have to be creative to live in this world, because it doesn't really work for us, because it's a lot of it is based on reading and writing.
Well, before we get to the Grace font, for parents listening today, or even somebody, who thinks, well, that sounds like me, what is the telltale number one sign that would be like a red flag to you to say, yeah, this is dyslexia?
I think it is if children are struggling to be in the school system and just trying to pick up on the reading and writing. It does tend to be some of the first signs, but it can be that self-organisation, trying to get out the door with a coat and a bag and continually going, well, they managed it yesterday, but they're not managing it today. What's going on? So if it's a bit like something isn't quite right, because as I said, our world isn't set up for dyslexics. So we're adjusting all the time, and we're struggling with what's going on. So it's actually going, okay, maybe there's something here. And it is then flagging up and trying to get some diagnosis. But Bella Finds Grace is a good starting point just to read through it and go, oh, does this actually sound like what could be happening for my child? And it's a simple story between a butterfly and a hedgehog having this chat.
As they do.
They do in my garden, Martin.
I find myself fairly okay to read a book, but my initial understanding of dyslexia was that the words be flying into your brain and you just couldn't understand them. They'd be all jumbled up. How true is that?
I personally didn't have them jumbling. They would be more jumbled as I'd write them. Even now I can write a B and think, hang on, that's not quite looking right, because it's supposed to be a D. So we can flip them. Some of the words, the letters, can bounce around, float. And it's sometimes you get to the end of a sentence and find you've read the sentence again, you haven't gone down the line. It's that visual issue. Whereas what I found in working with the Grace font that I've helped bring into being over 7 years, yes, it's taken a long time. It's very grounded on the bottom. So it's heavier on the bottom, but also detailed. So the letters, one thing, it makes it sit still. We took it into a school in London before, I think we were only 2 years in, and these children had us in tears, their reaction to it of, oh my gosh, I can read this book. And one young girl just stayed after everyone else had gone and was chatting to the effect of being out to actually read a book. And as she left, I said to the teacher, I wasn't quite sure why she was in here. She says she has communication issues. And at that point, we're all in tears, because it just opened up her thoughts and everything was in her head, but she couldn't get it out. And as soon as she found this way through being able to read a book, it was suddenly we'd untapped this young girl. So she was about 12. So she spent a long time, not being able to really communicate clearly. So being able to find confidence in reading, this font seems to have tapped into that. There's a lot of detail to it. It's the spacing between the letters and the shapes of the letters. So it's in the initial, detail of what we've been doing over those 7 years that have made it so readable. Cambridge University found out about it, and then we did some work with them. And they're actually saying, we've all been compromised on text. We've all managed, but actually it was about getting Bibles, newspapers out, get as much text in as possible. So we've all been compromised. So we're kind of turning a big ship here. But what it's saying is this is good for everybody, this font.
When I first heard about it and I was kindly sent some font of it, I was able to read it perfectly and thinking, well, this is perfectly normal. Yes, I did notice that the bottom of each letter was slightly thicker and it was a lot bolder as well, which was great. But anybody could read it. And it's like, well, wow. I am fascinated by the history of things, the origins of everything, really. You said 7 years. How did you go about it? And what cost was it for you? Not just financially, but everything else around it, so that you could get this out to people that would go, wow, and get people crying as a result of it.
Yeah, I was obviously already campaigning the whole dyslexia side. And then I went out to a publishing conference in Nashville. It was by the grace of God I was there. I hadn't gone there particularly for this. I'd actually gone there because my sales manager was like, I really believe you should be here. And there was quite a story behind that, which I will have to have a conversation with you another time.
Please.
So by the grace of God, actually, I flew in through a tornado.
As opposed to being in a tornado. Wow.
Yeah. So it was very hairy. Anyway, the next day I thought, well, I'm definitely supposed to be here. And then this chap, Klaus, was speaking. And I just thought, wow, you know, what he's saying about how we're not born readers, we have to learn to read. And he just described how we had come to this point of letters. And I was fascinated. So when I saw he was doing another talk, so I went along, and he'd, in the first talk, talked about creating a font or creating text that is familiar. So someone will pick up someone's book, they go, oh yeah, I know how they write. I like that. So I have another one of theirs. So it's creating that familiar. So I went into the second talk and realized it was the same as the first talk. And I was too embarrassed to slide out backwards out the back door. So I thought, he spotted me, I better stay. So I stayed. And what I did was thought, okay, this is beginning to sound familiar. I've already heard this, but I'm going to really take on what he's saying, and made a few notes and really was like processing. Like I thought, gosh, this makes sense to me as a dyslexic of why I am where I am and what I want to achieve with that familiarity. I couldn't quite find a text or a font that worked well. So he caught me after and he said, saw you in both of my talks. And I said what I'd done, and he was welling up. And he said, gosh, I go around the world and I'm telling people about this. And he said, you get it. He said, we should work together. So I'm just looking at him thinking, whoa, what are we going to do? And he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, I'd like a dyslexic font for my imprint, please. So that's how Grace Font was birthed. I had no idea what I was undertaking. And at times I thought this is never going to come into being. Klaus and his team have put a lot of time and energy in and money into that. And, I've put a lot of time, and our publishing house pays me to do this as well. So there was all this going, I hope this is going to come somewhere, because it's taken up a lot of time and energy. And then it got very exciting when Cambridge University came on board, because what they were saying is we'd published my first book, Journey with Grace, with it in, and they had a copy of it. And they were reading about the children in the school. I put those stories in there. And they were like, okay, we can see it works, and we're looking at it, we can see it, but we need to work out the science of why it works. So there is still work going on in the background about that. But the team, especially this chap called Arnold in the team, he's worked on all this kind of things for like 30 years. And so to sit with him and talk about it, and he was explaining how, we've all been compromised, and to be able to get the understanding of why it worked with him just gave us the spur to go, this will be released. It will become available to everybody. The big challenge is, Klaus has said in the beginning, we wanted to be able to give it away for free.
Excellent.
That's the challenge, I think, at the moment, for it to be fully released. I had it then on my computer just to see what it was like visually on the computer other than in a book. And I must say, I'm twice as fast. Before I'd read I'd write my email, reread my email, probably 4 times, because there would definitely be a couple of things in there. Whereas I can confidently type away, one proofread. People can let me know if as far as I'm concerned, it's going out accurate. But yeah, it just almost has released confidence in me and other people. So it's been life-changing. We've done books in prisons. But as a chaplain there who's written, I was like, can I put the whole thing in the font and make it as dyslexic friendly as possible? And let's see how that goes. And these books, we cannot keep them in stock. The women in this one prison that he's particularly written it for, but it's gone wider than that, they literally are stopping Simeon, the chaplain, down the corridor going, I've heard about this book. The women can read them. A number of them there on undiagnosed dyslexic and struggle to read. And they are going, I read it in one go.
Wow.
So it's all about the layout on top of the font to make it as digestible.
Grace Font. your surname is Grace. What a coincidence.
My one request was, could it be named after me? Klaus probably teased me with that for about 4 years. And then eventually he said, well, only you and me will know whether I really did name it after you or not. And I was like, of course you did. And by the grace of God.
Yeah, it's actually got a wider connotation, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Which is phenomenal, yeah.
Yeah.
It rings better, no disrespect to the Sarah font.
Exactly. Very happy with that.
Yeah.
All my books like it's Journey with Grace. And I've got Journal with Grace, so I've done a journal in the font as well. And then Bella finds Grace. Yeah, I'm kind of keeping the flow because of the font. So whereas I probably wouldn't have done that in my own books if I hadn't got the font. Yeah, by the grace of God, all these lives are changed by this font, especially mine.
Brilliant. Mm-hmm. For those that are listening and want to know more, how can they find out about the Grace font? What's available so they can basically buy a book or two off you? What can they do? So
Sarah Grace Publishing is a good website to go to. And there is a link in there to request to go on an email list for when the font is available. We have a number of titles in there, including the Gospel of Matthew is coming out soon. We have Bibles that have been printed with different publishers. So we actually sell them on our website as well because they're in the Grace font. So that's very exciting.
Yeah.
And a number of other children's titles, obviously. And possibly all of the titles will be changed over. So any of our older books are going to be changed over into the font just because of the demand for it.
Sarah, thank you so much for sharing this. And a special request, if that's all right, because I think you've got a far bigger story to tell about your own journey and what you've learned through going as a Christian yourself in the publishing world and beyond. And you can come back in the new year and we can do a proper Off-Grid Christianity with Sarah Grace. Would that be all right?
That'd be wonderful.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah. And on the 21st November 2025, the Gospel of Matthew is to be released through Malcolm Down Publishing. It is the first Anglicized Christian Standard Bible in the Grace font. And if you haven't already hit the like and subscribe button, please do. It really means a lot. Thank you very much indeed. Next time on Off-Grid Christianity.
Talking about, this comes up in my book. I share this about myself, that when my parents discovered the sexual abuse that I had gone through when I was 13, because my abuser was another woman, my parents couldn't quite get past the homosexual aspect of that to see the abuse. I had never felt more ashamed in my entire life than that, just the response of condemnation for this homosexual relationship that was in fact an abusive relationship. But my parents couldn't quite get around that for a number of years. And then when they shared that information with some of the people at our church and just the church's response to me in that aspect, I think maybe that's beyond embarrassment and into like shame, like I said. But I think that's probably the most embarrassing experience for me. Yeah.
So please join me with author and therapist Sarah Hall. Until then, cheerio.